Thank you, Chair Fonkum, Chair Jacobson, Vice Chair Zapia and Bailey, members of the 29th and 30th session, and fellow students. I hope you know how much it means to me that you have asked me to speak tonight. This is a great way to cap two very interesting and satisfying years, and I thank you. You know, I've had the great opportunity to be in a number of public offices, but none of the offices I ever held have given me the opportunity for personal growth that serving on the student council has given me. As you can probably suspect, I live in a very homogeneous world. Most of the people I spend time with are like me. They are old white people of generally upper middle class. And to have the opportunity to spend time with people who are not old, who are of many races and ethnicities, who are not upper middle class, who are so smart and so focused on important things and have shown such promise to continue the good and hopefully great work that they have done has been profoundly valuable to me in recalibrating who I am and what I know and what I believe about you and the issues that confront students. And I thank you for that as well, because it has been a tremendous growing experience for me to be among your midst. We have dealt with some difficult, unique, and sometimes unprecedented circumstances. I think the 29th session did a good job. The 28th session handed things off to us in good shape. We are doing likewise. So 30th session, don't screw it up. Now, I say that respectfully but seriously, because remember, it has happened. Now, this is the 30th session of the Associated Students of Madison, because in the spring of 1993, there was a revolution on this campus, and the students abolished the form of government that had existed for 50 years. And they voted to abolish the once vaunted but then discredited Wisconsin Student Association, in which I had served a few years before, by electing the Kill WSA Party. No ambiguity about its message. An organization which had done so much for so many people for 50 years was abolished because a handful of people in a couple of administrations messed up big time. Now, I am very happy to see two of my favorite comrades from the 29th session assume the positions of chair and vice chair, so I know that's not going to happen again. But I'm just saying. And to finish that story from 30 years ago, when the students had to choose which constitution to adopt in the spring of 1994 between the conservative Wisconsin Badger Association and the progressive Associated Students of Madison, they chose us decisively. ASM has been woke since its very creation. Now, you heard in that introduction that, actually I wrote, that I've written a couple of history books. So I want to tell you briefly about the most important and successful political protest of the 60s and how it relates to you. And that, of course, was the Black Studies strike of February 1969, which won its main goal, a full department of Afro-American Studies. And there are three things about that strike that I want to share with you. The first is that it was organized and led almost exclusively by black students. Of the dozen or so members of the strike's inner circle, only 2 or 3 were white. What the thousands of white students did was what they were told to do. Block buildings, block streets, do some marching. Having the students with the most at stake have the most to say in the strike was critical to the strike's success. And also critical was the outreach that the black students made to the dorms. And they were able to unite the kids in the Southeast dorms with the radicals of Mifflin. Now, the frat boys and football players were still a problem, but the teaming up of the freaks and the geeks was significant and was noticeable and would have lasting impact as the years would go on. The third thing I want to focus on is how the strike started. It started because in February 1969, the Wisconsin Student Association held a 6-day conference called The Black Revolution, To What Ends? And this really crystallized the growing Black Power movement on campus. The conference was curated by a white woman named Marjorie Tabankend, who would also organize Moratorium Day that October. She would become the first woman president of the National Student Association. She would later run Volunteers in Service to America under President Carter, and she capped her career running Barbara Streisand's foundation. An interesting woman. And along with Jesse Jackson and Andrew Young and Eugene Parks, among the speakers she brought in was a sociology professor from San Francisco State named Nathan Hare, who was at that point engaged in a very bitter fight with his college president, his university president, S.I. Hayakawa, over creating their own Afro-American Studies department. And Professor Hare met during the conference with Willie Edwards and a couple of the other leaders of the Black People's Alliance. And he told them, quote, "We're on the front lines at San Francisco State and we are getting our asses kicked by S.I. Hayakawa. You are on a radical campus and you have a responsibility to your brothers and sisters to take action." 2 days later, the Black People's Alliance issued its 13 demands and the strike began. So I draw 2 lessons from this last point. The first is that stimulating conferences with provocative speakers is a good thing. In fact, back in its heyday, the WSA conducted an annual conference called the WSA Symposium, which attracted some very big speakers. My favorite was Revolution 67, which featured the sex researchers Masters and Johnson, the psychedelic prophet Timothy Leary, and Harvard professor and future war criminal Henry Kissinger. Now, if you revive the symposium model, you will have to be prepared to defend some controversial and divisive speakers, and I hope you would do so as the 29th has done, because that's what being value neutral means. And because I believe that lawful free speech is indivisible, and that when a university welcomes a scheduled, sponsored speaker, however wrong and hateful their words are, if those words do not incite violence or threaten people, they must be protected. Again, I'm talking about invited, sponsored speakers. Unfortunately, there's a long history on this campus of controversial speakers not being protected. In 1920, a bunch of frat boys busted up a meeting of the Socialist Club and threw its members into the lake. In 1960, a bunch of frat boys busted up a meeting in the Union Theater protesting American policy in Cuba. Now, unfortunately, I'm sad to say that since then, it's pretty much been constituencies on the left which have been doing the busting up. And as a member of the left, I think that's wrong, whichever side does it. It is also counterproductive. The second lesson I draw from Professor Hare's exhortation is that he was right. This is a radical campus. It was a radical campus. It was a radical time. And this is still a radical campus. And born of revolution as it was, ASM is a radical student government. You are demanding answers to questions many people are afraid to ask. A radical time. But the problem that you will encounter, and I think you already have, is that the forces making this a radical time are not our friends. Far from it. Because ASM's existential quandary is that our rights and powers, in fact, our very existence, are subject to forces outside our control, both internal and external. And many of those forces do not have students as their primary concern if they care about students at all. In fact, sometimes a particularly harmful external force, namely the Republican legislature, is actually and actively arrayed against not only students, but the university itself, even threatening budget cuts to preserve white supremacy. Are these people not paying any attention at all? Now, I have seen this movie, and it is not pretty. Some of you may be aware of what Governor DeSantis of Florida is doing to a small liberal arts college called New College in Sarasota. Well, that is my alma mater. That is where I went to college. And to see what he and his new board have done to us. They fired the president. They denied tenure. They have abolished DEI. They fired the head librarian 2 weeks before finals. Is something that makes us all physically sick. And he has gotten away with it because New College is small and he is a fascist. But the University of Wisconsin and the Associated Students of Madison are big, and we can fight back. Now, the following paragraph is something I wrote a few days ago, and I realize it will sound misguided or perhaps even worse in light of the current situation. I've done a little editing, and I'm going to keep these comments in because I believe what I'm about to say is true, and it is this. To fight back effectively against legislative assaults on the University of Wisconsin, I believe ASM needs to fight cooperatively with the 3 other university power centers, namely the governor, the regents, and yes, the chancellor. Because in that fight, we are all on the same side. And that doesn't happen a lot, pretty much only when there's an external enemy to us all. Now, I understand you are hurting. I understand you are angry. I understand that the administration has a lot of work to do if it is ever going to rebuild your trust. And it is vital that they do that work to make this campus a safe place for all students and to ultimately regain your trust. Not only is that in their interest, it is in your interest, it is in our interest as well. So, as offensive as the idea seems today, please take the opportunity when it arises to work together to fight our common enemy. Offer your ideas. Ask how you can help. Because one, the 4 groups working together are more powerful than the groups working independently. As Benjamin Franklin said, we must all hang together or we will assuredly hang separately. And 2, as we are seeing right now, there will be many issues where those 3 other groups are not on your side, are not on our side, at least at first. And relationships you form now can help a situation from becoming a crisis. It couldn't hurt. And if the administration was here tonight, I would ask them to make that same outreach to you as well. Chair Jacobson, Vice Chair Zaga, members of the 30th session of the Associated Students of Madison. For the next 348 days, it is your charge to represent the student body at the University of Wisconsin with respect to their lives, their services, and interests. Think about that. Student interests, student services, student lives. Those are big stakes. So have fun, be creative, be passionate, but always keep your eyes on the prize. What a remarkable opportunity you now have to advance and improve the university experience of 40,000 students. What a heavy responsibility you now have. And since I agree with the Bard and have served on the 28th and the 29th session and have seen what we can accomplish and believe that the past is prologue, I know you will do a great job. So good luck, and on Wisconsin.